Good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is 10 o'clock, and it's time to open this hearing session, which is on matter 6, waste. For the benefit of anyone who is now present but was not present at the formal opening of the hearing sessions, I will just run through some housekeeping and the key procedural points before we move on to discuss the details of this particular matter. The Central and Eastern Berkshire Joint Minerals and Waste Local Plan has been prepared by 4 constituent authorities. So for ease, we are referring to the 4 authorities as the authorities, and similarly we can refer to the Central and Eastern Berkshire Minerals Plan as the plan. My name is Nick Palmer, I'm a Chartered Town Planner. Alongside me is Rachel Goss, who is also a Chartered Town Planner. We have been appointed by the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government under Section 20 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 to hold this examination into the soundness of the plan and to produce a report of our conclusions and recommendations with regards to soundness. In case you are not familiar, please address us either simply as Inspector or Miss Buss or Mr. Parker. Before we begin, can everyone hear me? On to housekeeping matters then. As there are some new participants present, I'll just briefly go through the housekeeping matters. The Programme Officer is Stephanie Street. She's sitting at the end of that row of desks. Now, Stephanie works under our direction and she has not been involved in the plan preparation process, either directly or indirectly. She is responsible for all the administrative arrangements. Outside the hearing sessions, any contacts that you make with us should be made through Stephanie. Signing in, just a reminder that everyone needs to sign in at reception, and this is not a requirement of this examination, it's just a requirement for the building. In terms of the layout and the seating, any members of the public or other interested parties attending just to observe will be sitting at the back. The usual conventions apply in that there will be one table per participant and any supporters need to sit behind. And we are content for a hot desking approach between the two. The microphones are available for each seat, just a normal operation. Press the button on the right hand side and press it again when you've finished talking. There should be the fire alarm drill is on Mondays, and so if there is any fire alarm today, it will be the real thing. We need to exit through those doors and assemble outside the front of the town hall by the fountain. The toilets are just outside that door on the left-hand side. These hearing sessions are being recorded and will be put on the council's website after the hearings for interested parties to view. Is there anyone present who intends to film or record the proceedings Saturday? Our goal as inspectors is to assess whether the plan satisfies the requirements of the 2004 Act, the relevant regulations, and whether the plan is sound. In order to be sound, the National Plan Policy Framework states that plans should be positively prepared, justified, effective, and consistent with national policy. The hearings are intended to assist us in that regard. In submitting the plan, the authorities consider that it is sound, and this is the starting point for the examination. If you are challenging the soundness of the plan, then you have to explain why and what changes would make it sound. We will be taking notes during the session to act as an aid memoir for when we prepare our report, and there is no transcript of these proceedings. Changes, I would just like to say a few words about changes. Once a plan has been submitted, there are 2 ways in which changes can be made. Firstly, main modifications which are recommended by the inspectors, and secondly, additional modifications which are made by the authorities on adoption. For us to recommend main modifications or amendments, if they are required to make the plan sound, the authorities must formally invite us to do so in accordance with Section 70 of the Planning and Enforcement Purchase Act. The policies map is not a statutory development plan document, and consequently we do not have the power to recommend modifications to it directly. However, in the event that any modifications to the plan require consequential amendments to the policy map, then these should be published alongside rather than as part of the schedule of main modifications. We can only recommend main modifications if they are necessary to resolve problems that would otherwise make the plan unsound. Main modifications are changes that would materially alter the plan or its policies. In the interest of fairness, they will need to be subject to public consultation, which will take place after the hearing sessions, and further sustainability appraisal work may also be needed. Additional modifications are changes which do not materially affect the policies in the plan. They are made by the Council on adoption and are sometimes referred to as minor modifications. Additional modifications do not fall within the scope of the examination. It is the authorities which are accountable for them. Generally, they involve factual updates and the correction of typographical errors. The authorities have proposed a number of changes to the plan in its schedule of proposed modifications document, reference MD01, and are referenced through their hearing position statements. However, I need to stress that at this stage, the authorities' proposed main modifications are just that. Our goal is to assess whether the submitted plan is sound, and we will discuss the authorities' proposed changes as we go along. We will ask at the end of the discussion of each issue whether there are any main modifications proposed. These can be worked together to make sure all suggestions are covered. In addition, we may need to discuss whether any of the proposed additional modifications should be main modifications. On the website, there are documents EX 8, 9 and 10 which refer to emission sites. And I just want to make clear these are sites which are not included within the plan. And so they are for our consideration and for information purposes. This hearing session, the hearing programme was published on the examination website. And there are no changes to announce at this stage. This morning, we aim to have a mid-morning break and finish around about 1 o'clock. Then this afternoon's session will start at 2 o'clock and we're going to finish by 5 o'clock. I shall be leading this session. There is an outline agenda which you should have copies of. The hearing sessions themselves will be in the form of a structured discussion which one of us will read based on the matters, issues and questions which is available on the examination website, reference ID 04. And a few paper copies are available for Stephanie. We will both be in attendance at all hearing sessions, and the inspector not leading the session may also have some questions. I am leading on matters 3 and 6, whereas Ms. Busk is leading on everything else. In order to test the plan for soundness and legal compliance, we will need to ask questions. You will have seen that we have already been doing this through the preliminary matters letter to the authorities in April, reference ID 01, and then with the matters, issues and questions published in August. There were a number of matters, issues or questions set out. It may be the case that for some matters, from the written representations and hearing position statements, we now have enough information, and so there may be little more discussion on these. We shall invite people to speak at particular times. If you have something to contribute, please indicate your wish to speak by turning your nameplate on its end, like that. In speaking during the sessions, please be as concise and specific as possible. If you wish to highlight certain parts of your statement or other documents that form part of the examination, then it would be helpful to us and everyone present if you could give document references, page or paragraph numbers. There may be some questions on which we now have enough information, so there may be little more discussion on these. We would also like to remind participants that you should have provided all your evidence in your original representation, and hearing sessions are not an opportunity to submit anything further. Any comments you make during this hearing session should therefore relate to points made in your original representation. We have read your original representations and hearing position statements, so there will be no need to repeat what you have said already. The purpose of this session is for us to seek clarification or further information on any outstanding questions that we may have. The hearing sessions form part of the examination process, and as such, the examination therefore remains open until our report is submitted to the authorities. However, no further representations or evidence will be accepted after the hearing sessions are closed, unless we have specifically requested it. Today I intend to go through the questions in the order that they appear in the matters, issues and questions, which are in the same order as the waste policies, W1 to W4. Site visits, we have already seen a number of the sites from public vantage points. However, we may visit some sites again after the hearings, and we will do this unaccompanied unless we need to go on to private land. If any access arrangements will need to be made, please can these be identified as we go along. Does anyone have any questions before we start? Okay, so on to introductions then. Can I ask the participants to introduce themselves, please, starting with the Council.
Thank you. Mrs. Briggs, Planning Policy Manager at Hampshire Services.
Mrs. Briggs, Project Manager at Hampshire Services.
Ian Marshall, Planning Policy Manager, RBWN, unlikely to participate.
Okay.
Kerry Unsworth, I'm representing the Court Valley Regional Park and the Chartered Town Planner and work for on an occasional basis.
Martin Dance, local resident in Swanfield, in relation to the Brookside business park.
I'm Kim Cohen, planning partner at Berkshire. I'm representing the residents of London in relation to Star
Phil Taylor from Econ Environmental, representing JPEX, Water.
Charlotte Crane from Horton Parish Council.
Okay, thank you. Right. Now, first of all, although the agenda concerns matter 6, waste, I had a note about Mr. Unsworth did wish to speak, because you brought us very yesterday. Quite wanted to raise in relation to matter 5, safeguarding, which answers specifically questions 5.1, 5.2, 5.10.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, and it's much appreciated having been away for inconveniently the last main part of the last 3 weeks. The point that we particularly want to make here is the safeguarding, as I understand it, relates not only to minerals protection, protection area, but also to waste facilities. And one of those facilities is the existing very unsatisfactory site to the north of Berkshire Farm, which I think is WA2. That is a site that has not got benefited from planning conditions. It's established itself in the sense by itself over the last 10 to 15 years, and I hope that you have the opportunity to visit the site, boundary lay, and view what is there. The reason, well, essentially, I think there is a very big difference between protecting land for mineral extraction, which is a finite resource, and sites for waste processing, which is a footloose operation. And I think, well, just to put it in the context, I've been working on and off with the Colne Valley Regional Park over the last 5 or 6 years, first of all to do with HS2, then Heathrow, and now on the sort of ad hoc basis as things come up. But essentially what the Colne Valley Regional Park is, well, first of all, I should say that the park boundaries are narrow in this part of the valley. It stretches from the edge of Heathrow on the west, on the east to the Green Mother Reservoir, the far side. So this area around Horton to the north of Horton is a particularly important funnel in the sense of a green corridor. And what the Colne Valley Regional Park is trying to do is do its objectives, which is set out in our representations, is to protect, improve that area and make it available as part of a green natural resource for the community and the wildlife. And near to this site is the the nature reserve. But anyway, the other side of Berkshire, I can't remember it immediately. I'll forget. Anyway, that's an example of a piece of land that has been improved. But when you look at this area around here, it is scattered with, frankly, problems that harm the natural environment. And it upsets us greatly that there should be a suggestion that an unauthorised and very unattractive, inappropriate site is viewed as being safeguarded. So that is our central point. And unless you've got any questions, that would be all I would say at this point.
Okay, thank you. And yes, we did have the opportunity of visiting and looking at that site earlier this week. The council would like to respond, please.
In terms of that specific site, it is a local use site, and therefore it's considered an existing site. So in terms of planning, it is considered kind of authorized in that sense, and therefore an existing site, it is safeguarded. In terms of kind of the wider concept, there is a difference between minerals resources being safeguarded and infrastructure being safeguarded. However, it's important to note that safeguarding of infrastructure does not protect it from enforcement action. So if there are some planning issues or environmental health issues or issues that the environmental agency needs to address through pollution prevention, safeguarding does not prevent any of those actions taking place.
Okay, do you want to come back on any of those points?
I must admit, I found hearing it quite difficult. The microphones on these machines, not the mic, the speaker, we're supposed to get sound through the speaker on the microphone, on the
That's the general PA system.
right, okay. Anyway, great. I think I got the drift of it. The point about enforcement is something that certainly we have raised and we are very unsatisfied about. And I mean, I think it's clear the council has not been taking enforcement action. It should have done at various points over the years. So whilst from my understanding of that site, what you see today is not entirely immune from enforcement action. There are elements that will be, but it has been subject to change over the last 4 or 5 years, quite significant change. I think what we are looking for is a holistic approach from the council to get to grips with this area, get to grips with that site, and I just repeat that I think it's inappropriate to say that site should be safeguarded. You know, what we want to see in this plan, and you know, I'm very aware of the difficulties of enforcement action where there are established or usually been established over the years and making immune from enforcement action, but there is a need for action there, and that I think the plan. I appreciate how far this plan can only go so far, and I understand the point that enforcement action per se is outside. But I think the plan needs to set a framework. It's very clear about this being an area for improvement to the natural environment and resisting inappropriate developments of the green belt, and this is frankly inappropriate development. That brings us on to other points, I think, that will come later, but I think there is a lead that this plan needs to take. I accept the point about enforcement action per se being outside this
plan. Mrs. Crane.
Thank you. Just briefly, Inspector, if I may, to add to what Ms. Monson just said, the site hasn't had proper planning permission. It is one that the borough, and I'm talking about the Royal Borough, have admitted should not have ever been allowed to exist. There have been a series of different people in charge of planning over that time, and I think it sits all there. When it was a small site, which it was up until about 5 years ago, I think it was allowed to continue because it was also part of the gypsy and travel community. And that in itself is something else I'm involved with, but it's a whole different issue. What happened then is that the site was taken over by somebody else, has expanded dramatically, where we were having maybe 3 or 4 trucks a day. We're now getting 3 or 4 trucks every 15 minutes, and it is consistent. It is in the middle of a farm, or rather at the edge of a farm. There are houses around, and it isn't even a proper road. So, from Horton Parish Council's viewpoint, the biggest issue on this site particularly is that it is evidence that the borough have not been able to ensure proper regulation and control of an area which is their responsibility, their actual planning. Thank you.
The council like to say anything further.
So just to reiterate that the existing local use is safeguarded. If any evidence should come forward that there are parts of it which aren't in existing local use, they would not be safeguarded, and of course any enforcement action can go ahead. But these issues are something that has been raised with us that we've considered, and with relation to another site, the Starbrook site, and they are part of the justification for DM15 as well, that we'll be discussing in the afternoon session. So consideration of what has previously gone on is something we would like to be able to consider. However, in policy terms, there's a limit to what we can do, bearing in mind that enforcement does not come under the plan.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on to matter 6, is there anything further on those points related to safeguarding? The matter 6 does cover the safeguarding of waste sites.
My final comment is going to be to actually look at the policies map, and I appreciate when you made about that not being something that one can object to per se, but it's the representation on that plan of the, well, it's seeking to identify the facilities that are to be safeguarded, and it shows the waste allocation. It then shows the aggregate recycling, chemical waste and other things. The wider variable shows the safeguarded resource for sand and gravel. And it's just really whether the plan is clear in what it's communicating, and that does clearly overlap with what we'll be going on to about the appropriateness of the allocation itself.
Okay, then, moving on to question 6.1 in the mathematical questions. And that was, how does the plan support the movement of waste management up the waste hierarchy and reflects the proximity principle? Now, in the council's hearing statements, in response to that question, you say that proposals for either landfill or energy recovery development will need to demonstrate that waste management higher up the hierarchy is not achievable. Referring to policy W1, does W1 actually have that requirement?
So W1A specifically says encourage waste to be managed at the highest achievable level within the waste hierarchy. And then there is supporting text as well. Okay, so 717, proposals will need to demonstrate how the development achieves the highest achievable level within the waste hierarchy and how much residual waste requiring disposal will typically be created.
Okay, so that's the question of reading the policy and the supporting text together. I just raised the question of, should that be required to be embodied in the policy working itself?
Like you say, if we then go on to the text in 781 and 782, we give you more detail about non-hazardous landfill and energy recovery development. And we wanted to ensure that, no other way can be achieved for disposing of this waste. So because these different kind of aspects come in based on different developments, we didn't want to put all of that in the policy, and that's why it's in kind of in the supporting text. But we could put specifically demonstrating how the development achieves the waste hierarchy in the policy.
Yes, I think just looking a little bit closer at that wording, when you look at the policy and you've got 1A and got the word encourage, so that's be trying to encourage, be supportive and a little aspirational, one might say. But I think the words in paragraph 7.17, when proposals will need to demonstrate, I think that's a stronger statement and stronger requirement. So if you were using policy W81 to assess proposals, then if you're looking at paragraph 7.17 as to your means of determining proposals, that needs to be in the policy for it to be effective.
Okay, we have said that, and we can replace encourage with demonstrate.
Thank you.
Okay, and also on question 6.1, it might be in the end of the case somewhere, in case searches, but I was wondering what are the existing recycling rates for local authority collected waste, and are there any target recycling rates that we're working towards?
We discussed the local targets in the waste background study. So, I believe that's in section 2. That's the general policy section. Right. So, 229. The RET partnership waste management strategy commits to meeting relevant government targets. And they had a target for alignment with the goal of 50% reuse and recycling by 2020. So yeah, and Reading had a corporate target of recycling rate of 50%. Bracknell had a target of 78%, so that's kind of 230 downwards in the waste background study. So obviously, most of these targets are just for household waste. So kind of trying to apply them to non-hazardous waste in general is a bit difficult, and particularly under circumstances where we've got a capacity shortfall. That's why we didn't specifically use any of those percentages for the recycling capacity, but simply aim to have more recycling than recovered.
Yeah. Is there any information on existing recycling?
I'm not sure there is. Oh. No, we do not have data on what the actual recycling is.
Okay. Okay, moving on to question 6.2. Waste background study, that's looking at HS 65. Paragraph 10.7. Paragraph 10.7 states that between 2005 and 2018, an annual average of 1,966 houses were completed, and that equates to 6% growth. And then later on in that report, paragraph 10.11, it states that 2,902 houses per annum would equate to 1.07%. So a larger number of houses equates to a lower rate of growth. I was wondering if you could just please clarify that point.
I think that's because that number, 2,900, stays the same along the plan period, because over 20 years, then kind of each year it's progressively less. I don't have the exact calculations in front of me, but that's what it looks like to me. Because each year it will be progressively less, so of growth. So, because there will be more completed, and then this number will get more percentage. So in the end, that 1.07% should be the overall average, but I would have to sit down and check that.
I'd recommend if you could just double check that, please, just for clarity.
Is that something we're going to do today, or?
If possible, yes.
Either need small during or during the break or during the hotel.
Just wondering how much time do you think you need for this? How to set the deadline? Is this a big exercise?
It should be probably half an hour to do something like that.
We can probably do it at the mid-morning break if that, yeah. You can a little bit longer if you need to have some time to work that out and not find it.
Okay, move on please to policy W2. Policy W2, that's automatically safeguards all new waste management services. The automatically safeguarded. Is that, again, a point of clarification, does that refer to changes of use of existing industrial units? Does it cover absolutely every waste use?
Yes, it should be.
Yes. I think the background text in 7.31, it does say that it does sort of cover the situation where there's a temporary plan condition for the waste use. But that would still be safeguarded just for zero emission to temporary permission.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we move on to question 6.3.
Sorry, could I just ask a question on policy W2? I think it contradicts itself by saying at the beginning that everything's going to be safeguarded, and then giving a list of reasons why it might not be. from a point of view of people who have tried to prevent planning applications being given to things which would prejudice the area. I don't see how that policy actually can carry weight in any respect. I think there's a lot of words. I mean, this is not really your first one, but this whole plan contains a lot of words, and in many cases, it could have been much more succinct and make it much clearer as to what is actually meant. I understand the way that these plans are produced are written from a certain time, but when you're writing something that says it's going to be done in this way, but actually we could go to a different way underneath. It isn't policy at all, it just gives them carte blanche to do what they want to do. In my opinion, which is probably
Okay, would you like to respond to that, please?
Yes, so new waste management facilities will be automatically safeguarded. That further text only clarifies that this is for the duration of the permission. So to make that distinction between temporary and permanent permission, but the principle is still that it should be safeguarded. It's just clarifying that situation if it is temporary. In terms of sites that people may not have wanted, again, safeguarding does not protect the site from enforcement issues, taking enforcement action. It's safeguarded from incompatible development, so from, say, housing being placed next to it, and then causing further issues in line with the agent of change principle in the national plan policy.
okay. The word temporary doesn't appear in policy at all. Whether I can see in this.
If it granted clarification, because the principle is in 46 already, if it would be helpful to put the life of the permission under part 2 of policy W2, that would be further clarity within that policy. The principle will be there, but if it helps with the readability and usability of that policy, that's something we could add in as a qualification.
It's the expected decision, not that.
Yes, that would be helpful, yes.
One of the concerns that seems to have been raised is in relation to existing sites and possibly whether some are lawful or unlawful. And this policy is about safeguarding all existing planned and allocated. And I think the concern that's coming through is about the existing and how the authorities manage the lawfulness, should we say, of the operations, and I think that's where we're trying to get to. So, could you help us in understanding how from this policy would it be effective in dealing with that issue of lawfulness?
The policy is not intended to address this issue. This policy is intended to protect waste sites from other incompatible development. We recognize the concerns people have with local use sites. However, in planning terms, I don't think we are justified in treating them differently from other sites because they are a local use. Therefore, the only thing that we could do was offer up and develop the M15, which would then deal with any future development on perhaps some sites that have had issues. However, in terms of them being existing sites, there was no grounds to treat them differently.
Right. Sorry, I'm not seeing any nameplates on that. Oh, sorry. I'm not quite sure when you really want to hear from me in relation to Star Wars, but just in relation to the point that's just been made, we welcome your questions about how lawful or unlawful uses are dealt with in this, and I think that is
is a really important point. And to suggest that the plan isn't designed to deal with that, I think is very concerning from the point of view of my clients, and I suspect that I've heard this already from other people around the table. At Starworks, there was a temporary consent granted for the whole site. Over the years, an additional use, which was considered to be by the operator ancillary, has developed, and the council has taken a view, which is contested and challenged by my clients, that that is now a separate plan. Our argument is that it is no lawful use, and the concern is that whilst the plan states that temporary uses are safeguarded to the end of their period, there is a huge ambiguity around the clinical waste facility at Starworks, which would perhaps fall outside of that point. And I think the councils do need to include some clarification about how sites such as Starworks can be protected from the client's point of view.
Thank you. There will be an opportunity later on to discuss the Starworks, but the council response to that, this point about status of whether a site is unlawful or not. Should that be specifically reflected in either the policy or the supporting text?
We would certainly not expect an unlawful site to be safeguarded, therefore we can clarify that. But yes, when you say existing, we definitely mean just lawful.
Can I suggest that perhaps some form of wording around sites without benefit and appropriate planning permission are not safeguarded?
The lawful use permits a certain land use. To say that we will not safeguard sites that are allowed to operate in a certain way lawfully, I think we would be going against national law and legislation in that.
Sorry, I disagree. I think you could reword it to say that you would safeguard lawful sites. And that would then allow you to say that you're not safeguarding unlawful sites, surely.
We are happy to clarify that existing sites are local sites. I need to be clear that anything that is outside of the 10-year enforcement period would be a local site, so that was not considered.
No, most probably not. Because of incompetence of borough councils, I don't think you're ever going to have an acceptance, and I'm not being personal again, and there has been stated incompetence in the borough on these and other issues, or lack of understanding, shall we say. I don't think you will ever get a situation that residents will accept that because somebody's stuffed up, sorry, not that it's perfectly right to go ahead with it. And therefore, in my view, and I believe in other people's views as well, it should state lawful sites. It gives us a way to continue to battle where we need to stop people from doing unlawful things. Please.
So just to see where we've got to now, in terms of inserting the word lawful in between all and existing, in policy W2, first criteria, your position is that you wouldn't want that in there, or you wouldn't want that in there, or you'd like to consider it.
Could we check with our client and just confirm that for you?
That'd be fine, yes.
That's okay, yes.
Thank you. Comment I would make is I think that there is some loose language here because lawful, my understanding is that when we talk about Berkshire Manor Farm site, there is no certificate of lawfulness. There has been said, there has been an inactivity, as I read it, on enforcement investigations that needs a forensic approach. And I think there is a danger here that there is a compounding of the problems that we've seen over a number of years. And I know we will probably come on to it later, but the sheer allocation of sites here is, I think, sort of the convenience set. And what I see is that there is an interaction with the mitigation approach and the compensatory improvements that should be happening in this area. And it's difficult to separate them out because certainly discussions I've had with the authorities locally and Hampshire on their behalf was that there is an opportunity here to get a wider improvement package, and I'm not seeing that clear wider improvement package. And it's got to be very, very carefully worded, otherwise I think there will be a drift and a continuation of the fragmented approach in this area. And this policy is one part of that fragmented approach, as I see it, to safeguard what is being suggested as a lawful use. And I've had a considerable amount of experience on enforcement matters. I'm in no doubt myself that there is unlawful activity there that needs to be enforced against. And there is a danger here of drift. And this plan has a responsibility to get a grip on the situation and make sure that there is improvement. If there is going to be something, we don't want it. If there is going to be something, there is a holistic approach to this area, a holistic approach to improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. In quick discussion, first point, we're happy to include lawful and committed website. This is a policy plan, and obviously what you're referring to is enforcement practices, obviously management practices, which is quite difficult to set out. However, we have proposed an additional modification AM1 in our document NG01, just to highlight that each of the authorities does have enforcement policies in place, and the plan is referencing those to highlight that those guidelines should be put into practice. So they are being highlighted through the plan, but I don't think the plan has got much power to influence the practice that will take to highlight that those policies are in place.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on policy W2? Okay, now we can move on to this question.
Sorry, next on the agenda, safeguarding is the portion, but are we concluding on safeguarding at this point, or will we come back to safeguarding on the agenda? It's the full focus, so I wasn't sure if you're going to come back to it or the safeguarding is being discussed.
Probably best to deal with it now, actually. Yeah.
Could I raise one extra point then, and actually one that picks up Mr. earlier point? Obviously, we discussed the minerals and waste safeguarding area yesterday under the minerals matters. We've had further discussion on that matter, and appreciate that whilst we have experience of applying that as an approach, and today it hasn't raised this issue, we can understand how there could be some confusion and there was highlighted some of that today, the merging of the two processes of safeguarding. So we would be happy to draft some proposal applications for your consideration, perhaps on the 12th, that looks to separate out those two approaches to have a middle safeguarding area and then safeguarding things such separately based on that discussion. So I hope that really helps with some of that discussion. What do you think about today? Is that okay?
Thank you. That is helpful. Mr. Edgeworth.
appreciate you weren't at the
I
decision.
think something would be helpful as well.
That won't just go through this last one. Good.
Yes.
Just one clarification, actually, I'm just mildly confused as to where we are on the agenda in terms of points that I'd like to make at some point if we're on safeguarding. If you are moving on from number 2 to back, that's just, you know, I can say what I need to say about the website. Thank you.
Yeah, we are on safeguarding. We're going on to waste capacity requirements now.
My point was, I think, in relation to 16.13.
Yes.
Which is quite a long way down in your main analysis.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether it's coming up the agenda. So I'm
No,
just
but then we
not wanting to.
we're working on to that.
Fine.
Yes.
I'll stay quiet.
Okay. Obviously, W3 that sets out the waste capacity requirements, and I refer to the waste background study, HS65, and paragraphs 10.30 to 10.50 of that document refer to a number of planned developments. Could the council just explain, please, how have those planned developments been taken into account in calculating the waste capacity requirements?
They have been considered when working on the evidence-based and development policies, but the main way of including the proposed growth rate has been that 1% figure from the proposed housing allocations. So while we've taken those developments into account, we have not included them in a specific way in the figures.
Okay, so is the consideration of the planned developments, is it embodied in the growth figures?
No, it is not, other than the housing, proposed housing growth.
When you say that the planned development's been taken into account, in what respects?
So then some of the criteria in policy W4 that specifically cases to major new development.
Okay, on to the first question 6.4 of the matters and questions. When assessing the waste capacity requirements, does that include an assessment of commercial and industrial waste capacity?
Yes, it does. So that's folded under non-hazardous development, as generally it is of that nature. And in the environment agency data, it's all combined with household, industrial, and commercial data. So it's generally used as, yeah.
Okay. And is the data for that type of waste complete? You know, are there any gaps in the data?
We use the environment agency waste data interrogator, which is considered to be the best available data. I hesitate to call it complete, but it is what the best available data, and it is, we've agreed, for example, at the regional level, to use that data as the basis of our calculations.
Okay, and regarding the capacity of the existing waste facilities, how has that been assessed?
We conducted a waste operators survey and continue to run it every year. So again, this is something that's been agreed regionally. We've developed a form together, and we've been running that survey for several years now. So we get direct data from waste operators, but where that data isn't available, we've also used data from actual throughput, just adding in a small percentage. For example, that throughput probably don't reflect full capacity. And only in the absence of any kind of data like that do we perhaps use the environmental agency permit, but the permit to operate at quite larger ranges. We try to avoid that. So I think there's a methodology described in the waste background study on waste capacity. Yes, so 3.31 in the waste background study shows the methodology for estimating waste site capacity. And yes, it's the primary method is the waste operator survey and also plan information, which might sometimes have limits.
Okay. Now, some residual waste is sent to Ardley in Oxfordshire, to Berkshire recovery facility, and Lakeside energy recovery facility in Slough. That could be clarifying the quantity of waste being sent to those facilities.
So around 36,000 tons are going to RD. So this was in 2015. And 70,000 tons were going to Lakeside.
And I understand that the contract period lasts until 2030 and 2031. I mean, is there a likelihood, is it possible to say what the likelihood is that those contracts will be renewed?
Yes, so I think for RD, there's an expectation that it could be extended to 2040. And yeah, Lakeside is considered kind of an ongoing use that we expect to continue in the future. So just to clarify, the waste tonnages going to RD have been included in the capacity gap, so we're not relying on them. We are currently in practice, but in terms of the capacity gap that we're trying to fill, we have excluded the RD tonnages because effectively that's a certain distance that they're traveling, so we thought it was right that if we could provide the capacity in the plan area, we should. For Lakeside, we have not included those tonnages in the capacity gap because we consider that facility is really next door to the plan area and therefore complies with the proximity principle, and that is the intention of that statement of common ground we're pursuing with Slough and we believe they have agreed to, although we don't yet know.
Okay. And, has any work been done on the likely capacity to be provided on the allocated sites?
Yeah, so if you have a look at 11 to 10, that points to figure 7, which then gives a representation of kind of the existing capacity. So this is for non-hazardous, the lakeside energy from waste facility, what we've allocated. We've also included for illustrative purposes transfer capacity, though obviously we're not relying on that, we're looking to provide management. And then the predicted non-hazardous arriving, so this demonstrates the capacity gap that kind of exists there throughout the time period.
Okay, so that's, you're referring to paragraph 1110, that's the waste background stuff.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to W4, question 6.5, this is the locations and sites for waste management. In the development considerations, in Appendix A, and that lays out the details of the allocated sites. What status do those development considerations have? How are the development plan requirements? Are they policy requirements?
So there's an expectation that those are specific issues that have been identified with each of the allocations that would need to be addressed as part of any planning application. We have included in the policy wording that they are in the supporting text as a way of implementing that and suggestion that needs to move forward. Our view is that the fact that they were in the supporting text for implementation would give sufficient weight to them, because there are specific issues that need to be addressed, but we do appreciate that things can change over time. So there could be more issues, some of those issues may have been addressed, but the point of the plans that is being prepared, those are specific issues that have been identified that we would want to see addressed as part of a new planning application. So it's a weight issue in terms of whether it's put in the supporting text with the view that that has sufficient weight rather than policy.
Yes, 7.54.
Yes, and it's an approach I think we use for the minimum sites as well. It's usually one of those pieces of information to flag up that these development considerations that need to be taken into account.
I think what's going through our minds at the moment in terms of words and things that are in the implementation supporting text, and it's the reliance that the planning decision makers will place on those. And what's in the box with the policy is what is used for reasons for refusal, isn't it? So I think it goes to various policies across the plan, but Vanessa will be trying to raise it. In terms of the development consideration status, there isn't at present a hook in the policy itself to take you to those. And I think that's where we're at the moment in thinking the effectiveness of that policy is potentially undermined by a list of things at the back, which are very important, and you'd be directing people to look at those. But for certainty for people using the plan, so residents, Berkshire councils, interested parties, the status of those development considerations and how they fit into the decision-making process. So that's where we are in terms of making the policy fully effective.
No, I can see that point, and principally there, so I don't see an issue with that, but we read that into the policy box itself and to look at that revised wording as we all references the appropriate location. We'll also look to make sure we've got a consistent approach to make sure references made to the further considerations as well within such policy box.
Yes, thank you. That would be helpful. It's not a lot of additional detail, it's just that hook to tie it together to make it effective. Anyone else have some comments on that?
Just there definitely needs to be a link.
Yes. I think now is an opportune time to take a mid-morning break. Can we break now and come back at 11:30?
No, that's
I changed twice. I changed the red. I changed the big one, I changed the red. Well, that's a trend. If I only have one change, I get about half an hour. We got to the front door and said this building is shut. So I thought, oh, so I walked around, so I almost got the inoculated because it's I've got a point of that. Yeah, but thank you to follow outside. I got this. I've sent that to you.
Yeah, no, that's the
We don't need to go to the internet. So you go back, you go who. Yeah, no, but it's I can't send an email. Yeah, but I kind of want I'm just on straight on. Yeah. Unable to. So I went back into Google or just tick LED focus. I'm conscious of tickets now. I mean, to say the check was full, but it's not really before. Never had that. It's just all the figures in the So that's I say what they can trust that. Well, you didn't have much time.
Yeah, sorry, I can get to that higher, but yeah, I'm going to name for everyone. Yeah, sorry, I'm terrible memory. Yeah. I thought you were in churches between London.
Really long observation, yeah.
We just want, we just hang around.
But yeah, I've just got
Oh, really? So you came around across. You always there. Should be a train for people on the voice. Thank you. We waited half an hour longer if it got to get a little train. Oh, yeah.
Yes, and I'm sure you talking about
I think it's on the fields.
I found it. Yes, but I think that generally there this bit of
Yeah, that's right. It's on such a- It is one of Use this chart for architecture.
Okay, thanks. Back in session. There's one question about the housing figures and rate of growth and the housing double check that.
Yes, thank you for the delay. So just to confirm, in terms of the housing of the road, in terms of that 2902 figure is stable, that changes basically the housing process as well. So it starts out from a figure of 1.19% and ends up with a figure of 0.97%. So I think the average there is chosen. However, the difference from that other figure is because the other figure isn't talking about housing growth, it's talking about the change in growth. So it's talking about just the new houses delivered, and it shows the fluctuations in how many houses have been delivered. That's why sometimes it can be as big as 16%. That's just the difference in how many new houses were delivered. It's not the actual housing growth.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on policy W4, which is the location of the sites for waste management, and that adopts as a priority approach, and it gives first priority to sites within preferred waste areas. And then only after that, the second priority is the allocated sites. We're wondering the justification for that approach of putting the preferred waste areas above the allocated sites.
Okay, so even though sequentially that's not how it happened, first the allocated sites were determined, and then because there was still a capacity gap, we identified the preferred waste areas. All the allocated sites are in the green belt. So when we were looking for our preferred waste areas, we were trying to find ones that were already in use and therefore much more in line with the MPW and kind of the requirement of an expectation of waste sites. So in some ways, we think the preferred waste areas would be better options in general. However, the kind of sites that are proposed in the allocated sites, particularly the AD and the aggregate recycling, are not waste uses that we did find in the preferred waste area. So in a way, they're kind of independent.
So the allocated sites deal with green waste and inert waste. You're saying that they have different requirements to other types of waste.
That's right, and that's those very special circumstances that allow them to go in the green belt because we haven't found other places for them, and it's they need slightly different requirements, ones that wouldn't be accommodated in industrial areas.
Does this require further explanation of the policy? Because if we read the policy on its face, it just seems to, it's got that strict priority, and it's saying first of all we look at the preferred waste areas, and only then we look at the allocated sites. I'm not sure. You have explained the rationale. I'm just wondering if policy needs to be amended to explain that and make that clearer.
Policy 4 currently says one sustainable waste management infrastructure can be supported within, or where waste management infrastructure cannot be accommodated within the preferred areas. So whilst it's sort of sequential, it's one, or if it can't be accommodated, it goes into two. Is that a hope? Is that?
I think what we're slightly struggling with here is the principles of find sites, you allocate them there first place, people understand where they can go, and then we move on to preferred areas. In this W4 policy, it feels like it's turned around the other way, and yes, you allocate them, but they're a secondary consideration, and it's how best the policy can be made effective by making that clear. It might be something we need to think about.
I think we can do this approach if the time to consider that can help things like conceal growth, what we talked about previously in terms of the priority. That doesn't exist.
I think with the preferred waste areas, would they be able to accommodate all types of waste use?
No, there's a number of ways uses that they cannot accommodate.
Okay. And, which categories of waste is it not possible to accommodate?
So, following the assessment process, no suitable sites were identified that meet categories 5, 6, and 7. So, category 1 is allocated. 2, 3, and 4 are catered to the preferred waste areas, and 5, 6, and 7 weren't available.
Just a point of clarification on that point. Allocation W81 in the development considerations, it states that one of the possible uses would be energy recovery. Would that not fall within, it would require a stamp, wouldn't it? So would it not fall within waste category, one of the waste categories 5, 6, and 7?
So yeah, WA1 is assigned category 1, 2, 3, and 4.
It's just really a query about the categories 5 and 6 are waste activities which require staff. And by the energy recovery parts of that, does that not normally require staff?
Well, this is proposed for anaerobic digestion, so some small scale plants
Okay, so given the plan identified, there's two categories of waste which the plan cannot deal with. Just explaining how the plan sounds on that basis.
So everything that the plan cannot provide to the preferred waste areas or to the allocated sites is catered through the criteria in W4, which then give clarity on location of requirements for waste sites and to the capacity requirements of W2, W3, which then encourage a certain amount of waste development to come forward. However, where the plan has a lack of sites, there's only so much we can do.
Given that policy W4 prioritises delivery of waste and infrastructure within the preferred waste areas, what criteria would be used, and in particular proposed waste facility, what criteria would be used to determine whether they would be acceptable? Would that just be the DM boxes?
Yes, that's right, although each preferred waste area also has a category assigned to it, which is considered acceptable in principle. Any other categories, we just need to submit that additional evidence to show that they would be useful.
The information in Appendix B, what status does that have?
Well, the waste categories are referred to throughout. So that is kind of definition of them.
Also, Appendix C as well. So, Appendix C identifies the individual preferred waste areas and states which categories will be acceptable.
Yes, Appendix C is specifically referred to in the policy.
Okay, that's my questions on that matter. Mr. Runsworth, we've read your presentations and also speak over it, but would you like to make your points about the mineral, the allocations WA1 and WA2?
Thank you. Yeah, I think the first point stating the obvious is the sites are in the green belt, but I would highlight the sensitivity of this section of the green belt. As I outlined before, it is a narrow section of the Corn Valley Park, and the Corn Valley Way passes down Foundry Lane, and that is really the only eventually the only off-road route for longer distance movement through the valley. So it is a sensitive area. Apologies for forgetting the Arthur Jacobs mentioned earlier, but what we want to see is a joining up of the routes through here and the green environments and facilities. And I think that context provides an important backdrop to the site search. And I know it is stated in the council's back or paper supporting the waste strategy that it has looked at the range of sites, and I'm aware of the list of sites they've looked at in the areas, but I find it an inadequate search which is defaulting really to these two sites adjoining the compound way, which are in an area which should be restored and improved for their natural environment, and indeed, as far as they are overlaid by minerals workings, that is what the the conditions, the agreements on permissions require. So what we're concerned about is the incremental erosion of that natural environment in this area, and I just cannot accept that there are not urban sites that could not accommodate these uses. I may have slightly misheard what Alina said earlier about not being appropriate in industrial areas, but I would say that the WA1, WA2 proposals are very appropriate within industrial areas, and that is where they should be found. And what we would see with these allocations is the erosion of the green belt in a very sensitive area, in areas that should be subject to restoration schemes. Now, I think what this overlaps with is the approach, and notwithstanding what I'm saying in our opposition to the allocations, is if there are to be allocations, there really needs to be an area-wide approach, and I would say policy approach with a wide red line around it that sets out the compensatory improvements to the remaining greenbelt areas here. That is a requirement of paragraph 145 in the NPPF, where 142 of the NPPF, where it says that where it's been decided that you should remove land for the green belt, they should be offset by compensatory improvements to the environmental quality and accessibility of remaining green belt land. And that's something that I don't see in the plan, compensatory improvements. These are not temporary minerals, because they are what would be permanent waste facilities. So there should be a policy framework that sets out what those improvements should be. Now this overlaps with historical requirements for an access route down the River Colne Valley here, the River Colne in the area north of Berkshire Farm. It overlaps with the fact that we've got various areas of minerals extraction and now these waste proposals. So that wide approach is what we are looking for here, and the simple allocations that we are seeing, I in the Colne Valley Regional Park are not satisfied, would bring about the area-wide improvement that is needed. The uses, the developments should be diverted to industrial areas.
Okay.
So, for specific points from me, then this will address the overall kind of Colne Valley picture. So firstly, on the NPPF 142, that when reviewing greenbelt boundaries, so we're not asking for a greenbelt boundary review, and we're not technically releasing the land from greenbelt, so it will remain greenbelt. So this is about proposals affecting the greenbelt, which shall not be approved except in very special circumstances. And what we believe through our calls for size and a search for preferred waste areas that we have demonstrated that that we don't have options outside the green belt, and therefore that we have demonstrated very special circumstances for development to the green belt. Additionally, proposal WA1 and WA2 have specific locational requirements which are in accordance with where they're being proposed. So WA1, the proposal for an AD plan, will be treating biogenic agricultural material and will be part of an existing farm, working farm. Therefore, much of the material will be coming from the farm, and then much of the outputs from the facilities are expected to be used on the farm. Therefore, in terms of the proximity to the waste and to the waste output, that would be considered an appropriate location. Whereas WA2, aggregate recycling, again, we have no functioning aggregate recycling plant, permanent ones within the plan area. So this is addressing a specific need, and unfortunately, aggregate recycling plants are considered poor neighbor uses within industrial estates, so cannot easily go into those areas without impacting on other uses in them, and therefore they do require a certain amount of open space to operate. And that area where the aggregate recycling plant is being proposed currently houses certain buildings and processing machinery, etc. So it would have similar impact to those currently in place. So those are the specific locational requirements and the reasoning behind the green belt allocation. In terms of the wider Valley picture.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, we've had a number of discussions over the course of preparing the plan to get an understanding of the aims and objectives of the Cornwall Valley Regional Park. We are in the unfortunate position that we've got very few allocations, and particularly for the waste ones, they've come up in this area, which we do appreciate. We've also discussed the mineral sites, which, whilst obviously we're focusing on waste today, we've obviously flagged up trying to work out where through restoration proposals we can try and help implement some of the aims and objectives of the Cornwall Valley Regional Park. We've got a specific reference in our DM policy on restoration, which refers to the Cornwall Valley Regional Park in paragraph 5.82. But I appreciate that probably connects more to the mineral allocation. And the Cornwall Valley Way, which obviously again is one of our mineral proposals, has got a specific reference about trying to align that and discussions with wider interested bodies about trying to make that work. Now, where it comes to the waste operation, we have also flagged up about the two waste operations. We've also referenced in landscape and townscape considerations. Reference the Cornwall Valley Green Infrastructure Strategy and the Joint Connectivity Statement, which at the time the plan was drafted hadn't actually been signed. I believe that's now been signed by the relevant parties. Is that correct?
The document that's been signed by a number of authorities, but it is a document that I would suggest is not relevant to this plan because it is a document that was prepared in the context of the runway expansion and taking that into account. So I would say, and it has been something we've raised, that it's not appropriate. This plan, really, the structure strategy is appropriate.
Okay, I think at the time we were looking at that as being one of the sort of documents was showing a joined up approach. But I think if you're saying that that's subsequently not so, I'd be happy to move reference to that from the plan if that's correct. I think what's probably a bit confusing in terms of development information, we talked about restoration, which I'm talking about waste uses here. But I take Mr. Answorth's point that I think we can potentially revise those wordings to talk about that in the context of green belt compensation and making sure that's flagged up, rather than using the term restoration, which is not relevant here for the waste settings, the waste proposals. But I think that those are valid points, and I think we can revise and take into consideration that listed there. helpful. Hopefully by getting those development situations into policy, that would give more weight and competence that those would be all part of the application.
Yeah, what I'd like to just comment on is the paragraph 142, because I think it was suggested by Alina that it was not relevant in this case, and that it was very separate circumstances that would be considered, which I would say very special circumstances can only be considered when a detailed planning application is before the authority, and all of the justification and circumstances at that time are set out. What the NPPF in paragraph 142, it does refer to drawing up and reviewing greenbelt boundaries, and but within that paragraph it goes on to say, and I will read the sentence, where it has been concluded that it is necessary to release greenbelt boundary development, and should give first consideration to land which has been previously developed or is well served by public transport. Now, I would say it's without doubt that the plan, we don't agree with it, has concluded that it is necessary to release greenbelt land for development. It may not be revising the whole boundary, but it is releasing land for development. The paragraph goes on to then say they should also set out ways in which the impact of removing land from the greenbelt can be offset through compensatory improvements to the environmental quality and accessibility of remaining greenbelt land. And I think it's what the intent is of that policy, to see where land has been, where it's been concluded that it is necessary to release land for development, that there are compensatory improvements. And I would say that there is no place almost in the whole area where there is a greater need for an area-wide approach to compensatory improvements, which is our main point here, because the incremental allocation is what is harming the area. Allocation and unauthorised uses is what's harming the area.
Did you want to say anything further?
It is my understanding that according to planning policy, we are not releasing or removing land from the greenbelt.
Mrs. Crane, you wish to make a point about those sites, WA1 and WA2.
Yes, I may, thank you. We made it clear right from the outset of our responses to the mineral plan that reluctantly we are pretty much resigned to the fact that there is going to be continued mineral extraction in the area. So I'm not going to stand up and flag and say that I'm going to put myself in front of a bulldozer or anything, because we know that's going to happen. We're not adverse to the commercial implications of it. The thing that is our main concern, first of all, the WA1, which is Berkshire Manor Farm. The waste management proposal there, and you just said that it would be for an existing farm process. There won't be an existing farm once all the rest of the mineral extraction takes place. The majority of the farming that they are currently doing is outside the area. They bring takes very large tractors in and out of the area, which of course is how farmers work, I understand that. But therefore the movement of vehicles, heavy vehicles, whether they're farm vehicles or trucks, will continue through the village if that is permitted. Boundary Lane is bang next door to the entrance to Berkshire Manor Farm. Boundary Lane is a huge concern to us because that is where the all waste processing is currently taking place. I'm looking at the list. I don't see it on your list of safeguarded sites. Having said that, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be, but it is a big concern to us. We are trying to stop the all waste waste processing that's going on at the end of Bunbury Lane, because it is a narrow gravel lane, which is part of a farm, Berkshire farm, which is a protected listed building. Both Manor Farm also has listed buildings, mainly the dairy. So we're looking at potential damage to historical sites through anything that is being proposed. If this was to go ahead, we would like to see a really strict control of the only waste being processed being from the farm. And I don't know that anybody is in a position to put that control in place. And certainly the evidence of the borough's performance, for all the reasons that have gone ahead and have been documented, is that they don't have the resource, either physical or financial, to make the controls that are needed for this sort of application to go ahead. As far as area 2 is concerned, waste management again, and I would go on with the others as well. But again, this is JFlex. They do make efforts to make sure that their trucks don't go through the village. But if trucks are coming through to input waste, I don't know how you control that from their point of view, because then hardly going to stop somebody at the gate and say, you can't come in. That's not going to happen. If it's coming from, for example, all waste, or if it's coming from Braesbury, again, what is the control? There isn't going to be one. We have this for everything at the moment, that even though there are signs up saying you can't take a heavy oil through the village, people do. And I think the inspector will have seen the level of traffic movements there, which is horrendous. So right across the board, our main request, plea, if you like, is if these things are going to go ahead, please will you put in place a road management regime that stops HGVs going to the village. There is a way that that could be implemented by putting a temporary road across from Ploy Road, which already some of these have planning permission for, going across some of these and probably joining up with JFlex. I know that Mr. O'Reilly was very angry that I suggested it yesterday, but it's not out of the question for these companies to talk to each other and work together and help create a better solution for the village. And whilst Con Valley don't agree with my proposal to turn that a temporary road could become a permanent road, I still think it would potentially give better protection for the village. That would be on that thing. The other thing, which I would like to just illustrate again or bring up to your attention again, is we have an outstanding section 106 for the Alfred Jacob Reservoir, the Alfred Jacob area, which is supposed to have been put in place in, we go back to a 1970 section 106 provision, which was made with Oral Code. Oral Code Software-Remix, Software-Senex, the land that JFlex, that some of these now have, I think has been passed to them by Senex. Everybody is denying responsibility. The Royal Borough have, again, and I'm saying, we lost it, we forgot it, and then they found it again, put it in again, and now we're just in a complete, it's not going anywhere. And so when you're talking about digging up a right-of-way and reinstating it, and when you're talking about reinstating areas back to Con Valley area and Green Belt area, I don't have any confidence, because there is no evidence of confidence in any of the operational companies that have done it so far, that they will carry things out. And absolutely no confidence that the borough is in a position to make any proper regulation and control of what is going on. Not just on HGVs, on pollution, on air quality, noise pollution, water pollution. These things, lots of words, lots of policies or references no evidence, and that is the biggest thing that really we are asking for some action on. Please. Thank you.
Council response, please.
So there was a few points. The first one is that all sun remain is safeguarded for the waste transfer station, so that would be in line with the current policy and proposed amended policy that any local site will be safeguarded. In terms of WA1, it is currently a working environment state. For example, the restoration of the full core extensions are marked as agricultural, so we have reason to believe that the agricultural use in the surroundings will continue. It is not customary to limit waste input into facilities, so waste can even cross administrative boundaries, and it is a matter of kind of considering what impact bringing in any waste would have. For that purpose, a transfer assessment was done on the site, and one of the development considerations is that a more detailed transfer assessment of taken is required, and an HDB routing agreement will be required. So the routing details will need to be considered at the planning application stage. I have no comment on it. I didn't want to take the
It's very quick sites of this prison for
Sure, well, but this is specifically for WA1 American Berkshire Manor.
The Berkshire Manor, I think the access, it was through the transport assessment undertaken for the plan, it's recognised that there would be these further investigations to the actual access onto that site. Both Berkshire Manor and Horsham site do flag up the transport assessment and which you do agree with the undertaken. I do appreciate what Mrs. Cruz got to say. We're hoping that by having a new plan in place, the old plan is very outdated and new policies which would be impossible and could be applied. So we are hoping that that would improve matters. And as I say, there's specific reference to the enforcement policies for each of the authorities.
It is a requirement to improve the existing access. Does that refer to boundary level?
For the Berkshire Manor, there's a specific reference to further investigations required for suitable access onto Stanwell Road, which I believe is the access onto South Garden. I don't think access Berkshire Manor on boundary areas next to it.
I can answer that, they're parallel.
They're parallel, aren't they?
Yes, but Berkshire Manor entrance is a wide entrance, isn't it? Berkshire Manor itself, the existing building, there is a huge existing manor building which is being landscaped, which is becoming derelict. The farm operation is around it. Foundry Lane is next to it. The existing all-way site is behind that. And if you look at a map, sorry, I do this a lot, but if you look at the map, there is a swathe of land behind Ashford Farm, Berkshire Farm, which is what is going to be dug up. It runs from Queen Mother Reservoir right across to Hoyle Road in Convent. So there is a crossover with Southwark House as well. I would like to think that the new plan will come up and be the sort of thing that we could all work with, unless there's real communication between all the companies involved and the councils involved. And that has to include the parish council. Because we get to see stuff after it's been done, and we get told what we should have done or what will happen. People actually live there, and it affects them very badly. And there's no point in having a parish council if we don't have a real input in saying what's going on. That's another story. From our point of view, I know it's going to happen. I know that most of this is unstoppable. But I do think that you and the inspector and the companies involved are in a position to make it less unpalatable, I'll put it that way. And that's what we're asking for. Keith. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, please.
with that.
Just reference to Halls point, if I may, and proposed site W02, the waste site there. The operator, JFX operates obviously within existing planning permission and a section 106 agreement which limits movements of those vehicles north out of the site, so away from the village portal, and with extensive highway improvements in the borough of Slam as part of that planning permission. And the applicant, the developer would quite happily accept another section 106 agreement for any further planning application of waste use on that site. And just in reference to water quality, so the site operates within an existing waste permit and extensive boreholes throughout the site and in compliance with that permit.
Thank you. I knew I put something somewhere, sorry. There's also an additional modification proposed, AN18 in our proposed modification document, page 19. And that's additional text regarding enforcement. So the wording here is essentially as part of projects committed to ensuring that minerals and waste development takes place in conformity with planning permissions granted. The minerals and waste development is not operated in accordance with planning permission or associated with schemes. The relevant authority will take the necessary steps to ensure compliance where it's excluded to do so. This may include taking enforcement action to ensure that any breach of planning permission is rectified. So that's additional wording that's going in to help hopefully give some confidence.
So, do we get the opportunity to comment on the additional plan, Councillor? Or the proposed wording?
Well, this is just a draft document, but some of these, the eventual main modifications will be subject to consultation.
Thank you.
At this stage, I might just draw attention to AM44 and AM25. And they relate to background text on the policy W4. And they refer to the preferred waste areas and the priority that's given to those. I think they sort of strengthen the policy. Could you give consideration as to whether that would amount to, or whether those two would amount to main applications? In as much as, do they actually also strengthen the policy?
So yes, we happen to do that. And I think one of the reasons that the waste preferred areas ended up being switched to the priority was actually in response to the greenbelt issue, because they already built areas of built. So if there was a possibility to locate waste management facilities within an existing built area instead of doing that, I think that's one of the reasons why the waste preferred areas ended up sort of jumping ahead of the site allocation in this process. And that's why we're suggesting that additional wording in this paragraph that you'll write that housekeeping, so be a modification.
One further question on that point about preferred waste areas. In your new statement, you have referred to the status of the preferred waste areas, and there may change over time. So does the which are the paragraphs in the supporting text that refer to this?
Okay, so in 7.107 in the plan, we state that the preferred waste areas have been assessed under suitability. However, planning permission is not actually granted, and the proposal will need to comply with all relevant policies, as well as consider the wider local plan and development strategies.
Mr. Dabbs, sorry for delaying getting to the audience, but now's your opportunity to speak about Brookside Park.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm speaking really on behalf of myself and the other residents around the Brookside Business Centre, just outside the village of Swallowfield in Berkshire. And it's really a response to question, I guess, 6.9 in the plan document, which says, is Brookside Business Park, Swallowfield, appropriately included within the preferred waste areas? And I think not unnaturally we would argue that it isn't, for a number of reasons, and I've tried to kind of group those within kind of 5 main points. The first one really is the name of the site itself. It's Brookside Business Centre. Park implies it's quite large. It isn't. It's actually a very small site, and it's bounded on 3 sides by housing, and the 4th side by the river Blackwater. It's a small family-owned, 2 generations of family business site, which currently hosts around 15 to 20, what I would describe as office-based type businesses. So these are small, there's a small CCTV and security company, a blinds company, a kitchen company, a lighting company, a fencing company, and certainly nothing of an industrial nature or a manufacturing nature or anything similar. I guess the question from the family perspective is what happens to their business going forward, because the site isn't large enough to accommodate their current businesses and the proposed waste management facility, and also the businesses of the 15 to 20 small office-based people on the site at the moment. Secondly, the site itself is within 400 metres of the village of Swallowfield, which is approximately 2,000 inhabitants. It's a growing village. There's new housing developments going on in and around the village as we speak. And it's always been a fairly rural community. Obviously, the proximity of a waste management site will change the nature of the village itself. Opposite the site itself is the Farley Farm Estate, and that is in fact a lot of that is turned over to Grade 2 estate parks, actually countryside bordering onto the river Blackwater. I guess the more pressing issue Also, in relation to the site is access. There are two ways of getting into the site. Westwards from the village itself, which means any lorries, etc., would have to pass through the village, either through the centre of the village or through a small street inside the village to get to the Brookside Park itself. The other access from the east is actually via country lanes and involves going over two pretty old bridges right next to the site, which cross the Blackwater in two places, which have been subject to damage in the past when lorries, although there is signage saying no articulated lorries to pass down the road, lorries do tend to access Brookside and other places via that site because it's quick and easy, but they've damaged the bridges and damaged the roads as a result. I guess even more pressing is that the site itself and Church Road, the road which runs onto it, is in a high-risk flood area, and it floods regularly. And that recent flood was actually in June, between the period of the 18th and 22nd of June, when the road itself was closed, immediately in front of the access to Brookside for 2 days. Water was about half a metre to a metre high, and that happens probably once, twice a year fairly regularly, because Blackwater overflows, can't get under the bridges, and comes out opposite the road and the surrounding area. And everything that we've been led to believe is that from the Environment Agency and everybody else is that that is likely to avoid this problem and get better than this time of years. I guess the other area is very much around the kind of environmental area. As I indicated earlier, we've pretty well got businesses there at the moment which are zero carbon in effect. To bring in to replace them in industrial waste plants will change the nature of that situation quite drastically. And with the potential impacts on the local river system from any unfortunate effluents or pollutants that escape from the plant into the surrounding area. Finally, I just say that Swallowfield itself has a site of special scientific interest on the southwest side of the village called the Stamford in the Mill and River Loddon. It's actually the confluence of the River Loddons in Blackwater within Swallowfield. The village also has a nature reserve called Swallowfield Meadow, which is a wildlife haven bordering over countryside, and a habitat for, amongst other things, great crested newts, various species of bats, owls, and heron. They're all in the vicinity. And I was asked to specifically mention this, the rivers Blackwater and Loddon are fished extensively by local fishing clubs. And they have spent a lot of time over recent years in improving the river quality, the river flow, and the nature of the base of the rivers to encourage more wildlife into that area. In conclusion, I believe, as do the other residents, that Swallowfield Business Centre, park implies is much bigger than it is totally inappropriate for the proposed waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to respond?
Yes, thank you. It is acknowledged that Brookside is a small site, and I think it just demonstrates in just how much detail we went into trying to define waste sites. I think it's important to clarify that preferred waste areas do not specifically say that waste use will happen, just that a site is assessed to be suitable and for particular categories of waste use. In this case, category 3, which is enclosed and could happen in units as those that already exist at the Brookside site. However, we do give you information that we're giving from residents, And in this case, when we put together the information that residents were giving us on flooding with the new requirements from the Environment Agency in order to up the flood zone level in order to account for climate change, we have concluded that we should remove Brookside Business Park as well as Newland Farm from Appendix C and the roadway area.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, at this stage, I'd just like to go over the notifications and the council schedule. And then 10, and then 11, and then those apply to appendix A, and start applications W01, W02. Now the landscape and townscape considerations. And then 15, and 15, that refers to Stubbings compound and absolute consideration regarding considerations for Greenville. Sorry, on that basis, that's similar to the NN10 and NN11, which both require consideration for Greenville. We've also got NN5, and that relates to policy DN6, which is also swing zones. Just at this stage, confirming that those are likely to be modifications. Yes, if I could return to your in-law hearing statement, please. Your answer to question 6.10. Yes. Paragraph B under that, under part of the first paragraph, you've got you've stated that the proposed sites are unlikely to cause substantial harm to the openness of the green belt. So are you, just to clarify, are you saying that they are likely to cause some harm to the openness?
think we assessed it in that sense, we assessed whether they will cause substantial harm, and to be honest, we concluded that they will not. To whether they will cause some harm.
Okay. And then the fact that the sites that are allocated in the green belt, are there any other site-specific factors that you would like to draw to our attention that affect the considerations of development of the green belt under national planning policy?
Yeah, so on Berkshire Manor Farm, we want to highlight that it's part of a setting that is somewhat built up with hard-standing light industrial unit and large permanent sheds, etc. Sheds. So the setting of it is already somewhat developed. I already highlighted that Waterford Quarry is an existing extraction site with shed and site office and welfare accommodations in that area. And for the compound, that it is a well-screened site, which already has a permanent hard standing and an existing planning permission for an agricultural shed. So this is summarized in the waste proposal study in paragraph 325.
So, if land is agricultural, does it count as previously developed land?
No, any particular area of life that proposing isn't all hard standing or anything, it is hard to deal.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to site WA1 overlaps the mirror site M2 Oil Quarry. Can you explain, please, what level of certainty is there that the waste facility will be provided on that site, given that it's an allocated site for mineral extraction?
With estimated reserves of 250,000 tons of both extension areas, it could be worked very quickly, and particularly with lots of the infrastructure in place and kind of an operating place, routing in place, etc. That should all be extracted well within the plan period, allowing for time for then the waste site to come forward.
If I can, we did discuss the time of which sites were coming on stream yesterday at the minerals, and we said we would obviously contact the process to get a date for that. So hopefully that will give some certainty of when those will come on stream and be completed to allow the waste.
And similar question for site WA2, given that that's an operational quarry.
Sorry, yeah, so the latest planning application on that has a deadline for completing the improvement works by 2023. So again, that's well within the plan period, allowing for the waste use to come forward.
So can I just ask, with WA1, is there a time limit on that waste management proposal, or is it an ongoing? The others are talking about, for example, Stalking Brook Quarry, that they said we planning application, I know, because it's the same at the moment, which is 2023. Berkshire Manor Farm, as far as I know, I haven't seen the planning application anyway. And would there be a time limit on how long it would be running an operation there?
We would expect the application to be for a permanent site. That is the proposal that has come forward to us, but obviously we don't have the details of the planning application.
In that case, why now I go back to, if there is no control over what is going into there, and as it will not be, will not have localised farming there for any length of time, we will fight that planning application as far as we can, obviously. Because it is of no benefit to the area whatsoever. It doesn't have it isn't part of the mineral extraction process that is going on in the area. I mean, I can understand if you're digging up minerals, then you have to infer minerals to reinstate it. But this is completely outside any of those processes that are being proposed at the moment from the rest of the land. Hornbrook Quarry has a limit, it's going to speed up, it's going to infill it, and then presumably it's going to turn it, it's going to send it back to agricultural land. I expect that oil will be the same. The other mineral extraction proposals will be the same. Berkshire Manor Farm, there's no mineral extraction proposed for that site. We're talking about bio-waste. Inevitably, it will end up being more waste coming from outside to the village, and therefore, I can't see that it really has a logical pastoral plan when you're talking about the holistic approach to that area, which you may not be, but that is what would make more sense.
It is our understanding that a number of the restorations are to agricultural land. For the detail, we would expect to look at the planning application stage.
Okay, thank you. In respect of question 6.13, in Massachusetts question, and Appendix E of the plan, and that identifies style words. There is an 48. Which I think Star Works is on the policy map as a separate waste size, but Appendix E identifies it as a separate minerals size. And I think AN 48 clarifies that. I think that is likely to be a very modification. Ms. Curry.
We've submitted a statement in relation to this matter, and we've also submitted a report covering matter in relation to the Reg 19. So I'm not going to repeat anything that was said in there, but assuming just briefly, Starbucks is proposed to be safeguarding policy W2 as a waste site. The site operates under an existing temporary consent, which was granted at the period of 1994. It subsequently was extended with further applications, and it currently has consent to operate until January 2022, and restoration will be completed in January 2023. Temporary consent was granted appeal, and the primary objective was to secure the restoration of the quarry void. The potential impact on residents was acknowledged, but accepted due to long-term benefits of restoration on the site. And I think it's fair to say that that point has been made every time that the application has been extended. And in each officer's report to committee, the impact on neighbours is acknowledged, but it's stated that there are conditions on those consents to protect residents. Those conditions have never been enforced and they've never been effective, and I think that's really important in this case. The site was never intended to be permanent, which I think is a key point here, and I completely acknowledge what you said in paragraph 7.31 draft plan, which clarifies the point in relation to temporary works, and I also welcome the introduction of lawful in the actual policy wording. However, this won't sufficiently cover the Star Works site, given that there's very unsatisfactory position that's been able to develop in relation to other facilities on the site, which are operating out with the temporary consent and without the benefit of any planning permissions. So there's a clinical waste facility which operates on the site, which has been operating since 2004. It's in the former tile works building, and the operators have always claimed that given that the tile works building was B2 use, the clinical waste facility is compatible with that use. They also said in 2004 that they needed that site for 5 years, and obviously you can use that. A B2 use specifically excludes incineration purposes, chemical treatment, or landfill, or hazardous waste. And the council agreed with that view. But despite them asking the operator to submit a certificate for lawful use, a change of use application, this has never been forthcoming, nor have they submitted an application for a certificate for lawful development. This is therefore an unlawful use, and it shouldn't be categorised as an existing site. As we set out in our main matter 6, when assessed against the emerging DM policies, a change of use application on this site would not be successful. The operation is contrary to a significant number of those policies, and I have set that out in main matter 6, so I'm not going to go through that again. But nor would a certificate of lawful development application be successful, because there has been a significant and material intensification on this site over the years, so it cannot be deemed to have been operating for 10 years continuously in the same manner. It has intensified and therefore changed the use. And to be honest, it's not acceptable on sites of this nature, and I've heard this discussion across the piece this morning, with significant impacts that they cause, for the relevant councils to deem that they are lawful merely on the basis that something has been happening there for 10 years or more. The lawfulness of an operation should be properly established. It cannot be the intention, or within the spirit of planning legislation, to allow uses such as this to become established by default. These uses have very significant impacts on those that border and neighbour the sites. All sites which claim due consent should be required to regularise the use through a fluid at the very least. This would enable the case to be effectively challenged and contested. I appreciate that this may not be something that can be secured through the plan, but the point that I'm making is that it's just not good enough to say it's been there for a long time, therefore it's an existing use. If we're looking at putting the word lawful in the policy box, it has to mean something. So we have to be able to test that it is lawful. I won't be at the session this afternoon. The DM policies relate to consideration of new sites and existing ones, which is why I've chosen not to take this afternoon. I don't accept the council's discussions earlier that DM 15 has any relevance to existing sites. It doesn't offer any form of protection on existing sites. It's relevant in terms of future sites and part of the test. The existing temporary consent on Star Works requires landfill activity to cease on January 2022. There are no other lawful uses on the site. There's therefore no need at all for Starbucks to be designated as an existing facility on the map. And we'd ask that it's removed from the proposed map. In fact, if it remains on the proposed map, it is entirely possible, given that the activity has ceased in January 2022, the proposal map will be out of date before it's adopted, because it will be no longer an existing site. So whilst I do appreciate that you can't require changes to the plans, this does go directly to the interpretation of the policy, and therefore in these circumstances, I do request Starbucks is removed from the plan, and that change is made. Thank you.
Is the council respond?
Thank you for that. So I just want to clarify the distinction between the landfill and the chemical waste site. So as you mentioned, it is the landfill that has the planning permission and will be shortly completed. That isn't being safeguarded. What is being safeguarded is the existing local use as a chemical waste site, which, as stated, was since 2004 and therefore is now immune from enforcement action. And in fact, the council reviewed and in line with that legislation found that there are no breaches of planning control. I do not argue the point that lawfulness based on time elapsed is not a good way to look at things. However, that is the current legislation. We find ourselves in a position that that is not something we can alter. What we can offer in policy terms, and is one of the reasons why DM15 was developed, is this look back at evidence of how things have gone before. While it's true that the planning policies are only applied when planning applications come in, and that is the purpose of the plan, it is not for monitoring and enforcement, it is for planning applications when they come in. One of the things that is perhaps missing from planning policy is a way to look back at things that have already happened at the site or under the guidance of a specific operator. And that is the intention of DM15. But in terms of a site that has been there for now 17 years, there is no current scope to say that it is unlawful, because the legislation specifies you only need to meet that time criteria.
The point Ms. Kelly is making is that the existing planning condition which expires in January next year.
That's for the landfill.
Oh, landfill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my point has just been perfectly illustrated, that the only consent on the site is the one that's going to expire in January 2022. We have constantly challenged the council in relation to their view that this has been operating for more than 10 years. I've just suggested that, in my opinion, a certificate of lawful development would not be successful on the basis that it's not in the same use that's been operating. There's been a significant intensification over those years. And so, as I stated before, this is not a lawful use that has been tested and established. And I don't want to repeat myself, but this just perfectly demonstrated my point, and the point that this should be removed from the map, because the only planning consent for any established use on the site is the landfill. And I just go to the point about the M15. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you are saying that this might have been established by default, by inaction over a period of years, and is therefore exempt from enforcement, which is a serious problem for sites, as you can imagine, how then can you apply DM15? If it is exempt from enforcement, it must be exempt from the application of any policy. And so I think that it's perhaps self-defeating to say that, but I think we can be realistic about the fact that any claim that DM15 can help a site that the council in question has allowed to establish itself through default is, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, incorrect.
Okay, thank you. Yes, given that Ms. Curry has sort of presented evidence regarding the benefits of resisting use, which may not cast doubt on that. What are your views on whether that should be included?
It is my understanding that Buckingham Borough Council reviewed the site last year, so taking into much of the